Welcome to the Deep Dive Podcast. Becoming the dad God has called you to be takes a deeper dive. Dads too often stay at surface level. So let's dive deep into today's podcast.
Welcome back to the Dad Deep Dive Podcast. What an incredible season this has been. And episode 9 is just going to be the perfect icing on the cake for it. Today, Jeff sits down with Mary Jo Reeser. And this is going to be a powerful message and conversation regarding how sometimes a man can be a better dad after divorce. Now, we know that God's original plan is for one man and one wife to come together and live throughout their days, being the father and mother to the children that they have. But we know that in life, things happen. Sometimes, on the other side of divorce, a man can make the decision to be a better dad. So enjoy this episode. And as always, thank you for joining us in Dad University.
So Mary Jo Reeser, my sister, my friend, I am so excited that you're here. We're breaking ranks today with this Dad Deep Dive. You are the very first in the history of Dad University woman to be on our podcast. And so I can't think of a better one than you to be our first. So thanks for being here today.
Very glad to be here. An honor to be able to provide a different perspective as a mom. And today we're going to talk about the divorced dad from my perspective and just how incredibly valuable a dad going through divorce is.
Well, I love your title, The Divorced Dad, recognizing your value, a mom's perspective. And we're going to talk about that in a minute, okay? But before we get started, I know you. Obviously, I've known you guys now for probably a decade, maybe, with, as a former parent when I was the principal of, and I was blessed to have all three of your biological and your stepdaughter,
yes,
that we'll talk about in just a minute, all of them. And so I've known you in various roles, but talk about how the other ways we know each other.
Well, we worked in ministry together at church, doing lots of different things, lots of good things. And then on the side, you gave me the opportunity to be a part of Suit Up Ministries, which really is close to my heart personally. So being able to be a part of this and make a difference as the only woman, female, behind the scenes, it's just really good to be here, a privilege to be able to share my story.
I think it's interesting, and I've said this so many times, that when we present to large groups of people, it seems to me, especially when it's a mixed group of both men and women, it seems to me that the greatest response we get for some reason, and I think I know the reason, but is from women. I mean, the positive reaction. And a lot of times after the fact, people come up and typically it's women that get our ministry, or at least they verbalize that.
Yes. And as we go on, I want to talk about that. One of those, revelations and connections I've had and why that is.
Yeah. Well, talk about your family and what the rest of you. Who is Mary Jo Reeser?
In my former life, although I am still, I was a registered dietitian and licensed for over 20 years. I worked in healthcare, had a side business where I did counseling for weight loss and disordered eating. So just being a part of Suit Up, I really felt like I could bring some of my personal experience as well as some of my professional. It was just a perfect blend of that. But primarily I'm here to talk about just the past 14 years and what I've experienced, and hopefully some of that can resonate with some dads.
Yeah. And
moms.
And you've been married to Darren.
Yes. I have been married to Darren the love of my life for almost 14 years, and I have 3 kids of my own, Haley, Colin, Dylan, and 2 stepchildren, Becca and another Dylan.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. For the first time, I told you earlier when our pre-notes, I was looking at our notes, and I never realized that you have your oldest sibling, which is your stepson, Dylan,
Yes.
28, and your youngest or second youngest, but biological son named Dylan as well.
Yes,
and
with the same middle names.
Yes, so I thought that was interesting, a great conversation.
Yes, yes. We have to go big Dylan and little Dylan. So.
Yeah, and I know you love all of them, and I've heard, and one of the things I admire about you is how you don't distinguish, in your conversations, your biological and your step children. And I know Darren has been a father to all of them as well.
Absolutely.
And it's so admirable. And because obviously both of you come from a divorce.
Yes.
Together to make this perfect, most times, harmonious, couple that has brought these 2 families together. So you do have this perspective, and the fact that we're talking about divorce, the divorced dad, and recognizing their value. I love that because I think that we talk, at Dad University, we had this topic called divorce but devoted.
Yes.
So many times we think, divorce, the worst situation is not only the divorce, the obvious breakup between the husband and wife, but the husband sometimes shirks or walks or doesn't fulfill always or doesn't see the role anymore as the dad because he's not presently, there.
Yes.
So I love that you said, you included that in this title of recognizing your value.
Definitely, and I really do want to speak to that, especially from my personal scenario. And I think I can speak to what you said in divorce as to why a dad may acquiesce, why a dad may feel pushed out. I've made these connections as my kids have become young adults and having those conversations, but also some of the newer research that I have been informed about, in addition to talking to other dads and moms, and some of this makes a little bit more sense to me based on the decisions I made 14 years ago. And one of them is that our system does set up a part-time situation for a dad when you really think about it. And what the research is saying now is that shared parenting, equal time, is better for kids. There was a study by the American Psychological Association that said children who spend shared parenting time compared to kids who only get to see their dads on weekend grow up with higher self-esteem, do better in school, have better family bonds, and less vulnerable to behavioral and emotional problems. So I never really considered that. And this is the other thing you were talking about, women and being the mom, is that our gender typical role, which I was, and I carried most of the parenting responsibilities, dad does go more to being a provider, even though that's changing, right? So I really started to evaluate that because in my heart of hearts, I really thought I was trying to encourage their dad to be a part and be full-time, but my kids were with me most of the time, and I was assuming that. So I really get that now. And I get now as moms how we can be advocates for dads that are going through a divorce. This has been a paradigm shift for me, and in Suit Up, I hope that I can communicate some of that.
Well, I can imagine that when you're going through the divorce, it's hard to separate that the feelings that you may have at that time between you and your, future ex.
Yes.
But at the same time, realize that the essential role and encouraging that essential role from your ex at the same time.
Yes.
So it's easier to see that hindsight.
It is for sure. And but I needed to understand the why, the why in my decision. And it totally made sense to me that in the context of a marital relationship, that a mom, even when they're working and they're the provider, research says they still carry more of those responsibilities. So in my mind, and I love this, I heard someone, I don't know if it was my counselor or someone that told me this, is that mom usually views herself in a divorce as 150% and dad as 50%. But if we can do what's best for our kids, and mom can say, because I realized how overwhelmed I was, and that's not good for my kids. We've talked about that. Instead of viewing myself as 150%, is 100%, and giving dad the opportunity to be 100%, and that full-time dad, instead of the part-time dad that a lot of states encourage, the kids to be with mom. And so that's a paradigm shift. And in my perspective of kind of like, even if I know a mom that's going through that, of saying, hey, have you thought about it this way? Divorce is so painful. It's so disruptive. It unravels every part of your life. And putting your kids first and wanting to be the best parents you can be in the scenario of allowing dad to be, that full-time dad, that devoted dad.
Yeah, I come from a divorced family. My parents divorced when I was in the 7th grade. I have to say, though, I tell this to people that my parents divorced each other, but neither one of them divorced me. I mean,
Right.
You know me, I had a mom that was active and a dad who stayed active. And he had to be intentional, though,
Right.
because you're right. There is a system that I think there are dads out there that probably would tell you that at the onset they were intentional, but because they're
Yes.
not visible
Yes.
or they're not
Yes.
available, and because life happens,
Yes.
it gets, I hate to use this word easier, but it does, out of sight, out of mind, and life happens.
Right.
And
It's a natural
you become progressively farther and farther and less and less and less part of your kid's life if you don't maintain that intentionality.
Right. Well, and that's where, as the other parent, you can help with that. You can collaborate more. And so it also redefined like what the system calls co-parenting. Shared parenting, where you're 100% in, is really different than co-parenting. So that communication is every day instead of once a week or once a month, and we can do that now. Dads can do that now. I mean, there's so many ways to be able to communicate. But I think the attitude on part of the mom has to be there too. And I think that's really, really, really important. And again, divorce can be really, there's going to be a lot of conflict. So getting to that place and understanding that, I think, is really important.
You've given me some great questions here, and one of them was, to start off, was what are some things that you've learned about divorce and the role of the dad?
Well, I touched on it a little bit about the system, and the part-time dad, and then realizing that the research now, not 14 years ago, that shared parenting actually is better. So that was kind of, my first paradigm shift. And then that actually divorce, not that divorce is a good thing, but it's been shown that divorce can give dad the opportunity to be a better dad. And so I was like, let me look into that. Why would that be? Well, it kind of forces a dad, like you said, into that role if it's a shared parenting dynamic, if that's what we're working with. So mom is doing all the caretaking. It gives him that space to become more adept at that and reprioritizing. He hasn't, naturally gone back to making working more, and mom caretaking more. So that's been an interesting thing for me to think about. The trend is getting better from dads being involved in kids' lives. In the 70s, there was a study that said it was only 8% of dads that didn't live with their kids. to now it's 28% in the 2000s. So it's getting better. You know, so that role model can also help inspire dads to see that that's happening now. They need, and how to figure that out, how to support each other, which Suit Up Ministry is all about, is that community, the resources.
Yeah.
Because it's a scary thing for both parents. Parenting is just hard, even within the context of a marriage. But then when you add divorce to it, it's hard.
Yeah.
So moms can provide that support, and then divorced dads and community. And we have so much more information than we did 14 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of my learning curve there.
Of course, in Suit Up Ministries, we always tell our men that one of the best things they can do for their kids is to love their mom. Okay, so today we're talking about divorce, and we know that divorce happens,
right?
But we also don't want to diminish we want to celebrate the marriage, the couple, and encourage men and women to work through those differences. But we do know there are obviously some situations as we look at the statistics, the stats,
right?
How do we handle that? Looking at those, so as you say, we got to deal with the circumstances that are in front of us,
right,
and not walk away also from our responsibilities of our children that we had in this marriage, regardless of the circumstances. And so how can a mom support and encourage that full-time role for a divorced dad? I mean, so what would be the keys there?
Well, and I've reflected on that, because when there's a lot of conflict, and it's not in every divorce, but divorce is just complicated. There's a lot of layers. It is so important to speak very highly of each other and maintain that respect and have those conversations not around the kids. So moms can do a better job of that, and every day come up with 3 things about their dad that they think is amazing. And mom can help suggest those things, not just occasionally, but and it promotes some healing, and give it just good memories too, and lift him up, because both mom and dad are, hurting. And that, just as that family and respecting each other, I think is something that moms can be aware of, to be more intentional about. I mentioned just collaborating, not just co-parenting. So not just saying, how can I help you, but how can I better help you? How can I better support you? I know that this parenting thing, I've kind of taken on a lot of it. Like, what do you need to know? What do you, where can I help you fill in those gaps, until you start feeling a little bit more able to handle that? Because as a mom, we are very familiar with trying to multitask and juggle everything, And so one of the things in the research that says, though, about divorced dads having an opportunity of being better dad is that because they don't have someone doing the 150%, they feel a little bit more confident in not having someone kind of going, hey, don't do it that way, that it's okay to make mistakes and that they can do it, and it gives them more time to be able to do that as well. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's really looking at the glass half full, versus empty. Let's face it, divorce, as we know, it's difficult, but I'm in this situation. I'm the kid's father. How can I maximize this opportunity?
Right.
You're right. To maybe my kids know me in a different way that they would maybe have not known me if we were together. So now I kind of get what you're saying in this circumstance.
Right. Yeah. And then divorce also really brings up a lot of emotion of some loneliness, and so you do have a greater appreciation for your kids and that time with them. And a dad can experience that as well, of realizing like I can really connect with them now, in a different way. Ideally we know how sacred marriage is, but we're faced with this circumstance. How can we, like you said, look at this and look at it as an opportunity? So I like that, and in all of that, it really exemplifies how valuable a dad is, in the presence of divorce and difficult circumstances. Because, typical divorce, dad gets to see them on the weekends and one night a week, part-time.
Yeah. I know my circumstances was every other weekend. And when I was in 7th grade and 8th grade, 2 weeks was a long time. I mean, it was like Sunday nights were not easy, and even Sunday nights are still not easy for me as I reflect and I think about saying goodbye to my dad for 2 weeks. And for someone who's in junior high, that's a long time. And I was lucky that I had a dad that was involved. So I can't imagine. I think maybe that's why I have a heart for men and children that are separated, because I know that are dads that can't help it because of work, what have you.
Right.
And so the distance is even farther, or the time period is even longer than a 2 week. Well,
and I think that's something I recognize too, and feeling like having them so much more, not just feeling, tired and overwhelmed, but also my heart aching that my kids weren't with their dad, and like, what can I do to help bridge that better? So like you, like this is still a part of your life and my kids' lives, like we both get really emotional, and I get very emotional in talking to my kids now as young adults. I mean, and seeing that the physical distance is now between them and their father, and really trying to see where can I continue and not give up for them, and how to coach them as well, to connect.
Well, we encourage men that are listening, and I always imagine the audience and we pray for the people that are men and women that are perhaps listening to us talk today, that maybe they hear one thing that spurs them on, that they connect with, they relate to.
Yeah.
One message we want to remind them is that wherever they are in their circumstances, that it's never too late.
Absolutely.
There's time for reconciliation.
Yes. And that's something I can speak to from personal experience. When I married my husband, that was really one of the things that was so noble. He drove over 2 hours for 16 years to see his son. And there were times he drove to see him and his son didn't want to see him, or he was withheld from him. And he just kept on. And I watched him be rejected and miss his son desperately. But he never gave up. And now that his son he's 28, and he's going through his own stuff, he calls his dad. He calls his dad first. And that was a lot of a rocky road, and so to see that is just gives such hope. Yeah. It really does. And
some of that maybe obviously every story is different, and that every kid has a different reason why at that point in his or her life he doesn't want to be with his dad or mom. I mean, that normal teenager.
It's normal developmental stuff.
But then on top of what you got a divorce and then distance and so forth. But the fact that your husband, that Darren, made that effort. So we have to be beyond intentional. We have to be persistent.
Yes. And mom does too.
Yeah.
I think it's our nature to step in all the time. And one of the things that mom can step back. I don't know where I read it, but it said something like control freak moms make terrible dads. It's that. Yeah. It's that bridging, that enabling them to be the dad that they can be, and giving them that confidence. And it's not to say all situations are like that, but it's to help a circumstance that's not ideal for both people.
Wow. So one of your questions is, what if you didn't have a dad present in your life or had a dad that was a role model for you?
Well, like you, that's very personal to me, and very significant in the fact that I didn't have that modeled to me, or parents that modeled that emotional presence and connection. So moreover, for my kids, that was a really big thing to me. So I recognize that as what we talk about as a generational cycle, and that you can't, even though you didn't have that modeling, that you still can do it, that you can still learn, but you have to recognize that to be able to make those changes. But again, in Suit Up, what we talk about is just one small change can make a difference, and it can break that cycle. But it's not going to be easy, and it is going to be a learning curve, just as parenting is in general. There's always something that you're learning. Your kids teach you. So it's not easy, and there's that wound there, but there still is hope. And there are people and community to also guide you. And there are other divorced dads that can be that mentor to you, even if you have different experiences.
Yeah.
So, and I think more than ever today, we do have a lot of resources now that can guide us.
Yeah.
So there's hope.
Yeah. Yeah, we talk about either sometimes you can break the cycle up and down. Sometimes you can even influence your own father.
Right.
But typically we're talking about being the cycle breaker. From the next generations on, and that's easier to do when you're surrounded by other men that are doing it. So
exactly.
to look for those men to plug in somewhere, or to
you've got to take that step though, and it's not easy all the time.
Yeah, because then I think that's why sometimes, as I mentioned before, women are a lot more apt to come up and say, "Hey, I hear you, I get you." It's because either men say, "Hey, I got this," or I've gone too far. There's no return, or I'm not worthy, or I don't know how, and I'm afraid to ask because I'm a man, and I'm supposed to know these things. Well, again, if we don't, there's no when you bring a baby home the first time, I don't care. Everybody says we're not going to have a child until we're ready. Well, you're never ready.
No.
Are you really
You're
ever
not.
ready? So you bring that baby home for the first time. There's no owner's manual,
Right.
And even if there is, the books out there, it's never, one size does not fit all. So it's a learning process, and that's like being a dad. Every circumstance is different, but you have to be that daily active, devoted dad and be persistent.
Yes.
And
so there's. In divorce, there are nuances that are different, in other different situations that dads are in, whether, they've adopted or, and so I think that's really what I'm speaking to is the divorce, umbrella of that dad and understanding that it does make things different.
So the last question, or second to last question, we really kind of answered, but do you think it's ever too late to be a present and full-time dad? And we say as a ministry, no, it's never too late.
Right.
But so specifically, what would be the first step that you would say, if today I'm going to do this to reach? How do I make that? How do I take that first step to be?
It has to be that commitment to go, I'm all in, and I'm going to do whatever it takes, even if it's a challenge, even if I get rejected, even if I'm not well received. I first need to, commit in that attitude of, this is not in my comfort zone. But because I have made a decision to do that, what are the steps that I need to take? Because it's different for everybody. Everybody, what works for you and what works for me might not, in terms of help, what that is in that community, or if it's counseling, or if it's just talking to other divorced dads, or so I think it's that first step, in 1,000 steps, the one step in a journey of 1,000. You just got to take the first step, and that is intentionality.
Yeah. My dad used to say you have to be willing.
That's right.
And you have to be coachable. And that's that humility.
Absolutely.
Of just saying, I'm sorry.
Yes. And just recently I've had to do that with my kids, and looking at what I did to make a difference in the generational cycle, but also some of the other stuff that I've had to apologize for.
Yeah. Well, Mary Jo, I want to thank you for being on with us today. And I just want to thank you for being the mother and the wife and that you are, and the friend and the precious sister that you are. And I know that our listeners are going to gain so much wisdom from your words and from the woman's perspective. So thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And just a final word out there to the divorced dads, that you matter and you are valuable.